I am Julian. I am 32 years old. Exactly 3 months ago, the very people who brought me into this world, my own mother and father, completely drained my entire life savings to fund a luxury vacation for my older brother and his family. While I was practically killing myself, sacrificing my youth, my health, and pouring every single dollar of my hard-earned salary into a joint account to save our family home from foreclosure, my mother had the absolute audacity to send me a text message that read, "We are vacationing in Miami with your brother's family. We emptied the joint account. Haha." They laughed at my sheer exhaustion. They humiliated me, treating me like a disposable ATM rather than a human being, rather than their own son. But there was one massive, catastrophic secret they did not know. The very banking network they were using to steal from me, the infrastructure they relied on to fund their extravagant betrayal, was protected by the fraud detection software my tech startup had just successfully deployed. And right now, as I speak to you, they are sitting in a cold courthouse facing federal scrutiny, completely ruined, and begging me to withdraw the evidence. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their arrogance into their absolute destruction, please hit that like button if you believe that karma always collects its debts. And do not forget to tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to me. Now, let us go back to the exact moment my world shattered and how I built a new one from the wreckage. It was a typical freezing Tuesday morning in my tech startup office in downtown Wichita, Kansas. The sky outside was a bleak slate gray, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. The smell of cheap, dark roast coffee filled the air, mingling with the hum of high-powered servers in the background. That hum usually gave me a deep sense of peace. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of my future. I was in the middle of a massive make-or-break pitch with a prospective enterprise client. I was standing in front of a whiteboard, marker in hand, smiling and walking them through our latest cybersecurity protocols. My adrenaline was pumping. This deal could finally put us on the map and allow me to take a real salary for the first time in 2 years. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Just a single sharp vibration. I am a professional. I normally ignore my phone during meetings, leaving it strictly on silent. But I was on edge because I was expecting a critical update from the bank regarding the mortgage payment on my parents' house. The property taxes were due, and my father had been hounding me about it relentlessly. I thought the bank might be flagging a transfer delay. So, with a polite smile, I excused myself, pulled the phone out, and glanced at the screen, keeping my professional demeanor perfectly intact. The message was from my mother, Genevieve. It was not a bank alert. It was a nuclear bomb. "Julian, we are vacationing in Miami with Harrison and Clara. We emptied the joint account. Haha, you work too much, sweetie. Leave the finances to us. Don't forget to lock up the house if you stop by." I stopped breathing. The air simply vanished from my lungs. The words did not compute in my brain at first. I read them again and again. Emptied the joint account. That account was not a slush fund. It was not a vacation jar. It was the absolute, non-negotiable lifeline for our family's real estate. It held years of my blood, sweat, and tears. My skipped lunches, my canceled weekend trips, the money I was supposed to use for a down payment on my own life, to maybe, one day, start a family of my own. All of it completely wiped out in a single swipe. I felt a cold, paralyzing rush of adrenaline hit the back of my neck, spreading down my spine like ice water. I gripped the edge of the conference table. I gripped it so hard I could feel the wood grain digging into my skin, my knuckles turning completely white. My own mother, my own flesh and blood. I looked across the glass table at the client who was sipping his water, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire universe had just collapsed. I excused myself for exactly 10 seconds, stepping slightly toward the window. I did not scream. I did not throw the expensive phone against the brick wall, even though every single fiber of my being, every primitive instinct I had, wanted to destroy something. The betrayal was so deep so profound it bypassed anger and went straight into a terrifying, unnatural calm. I looked at the text message. The ha-ha, that was the part that broke me, and then instantly rebuilt me into something entirely different. They weren't just stealing from me. They were mocking my dedication. They were laughing at my sacrifice. I unlocked the screen. I didn't type a paragraph of rage. I didn't ask why. I simply typed 2 words, hit send, and slid the phone back into my pocket. Good luck. I turned around, walked back to the whiteboard, poured the client another cup of coffee with a perfectly steady hand, and proceeded to close the biggest deal of my entire life. Outwardly, I was the picture of a calm, collected, successful entrepreneur. But inwardly, an absolute hurricane was forming, gathering strength, preparing to wipe the coast completely clean. As soon as the client shook my hand, signed the letter of intent, and stepped onto the elevator, the facade dropped. I walked back into my private office, closed the heavy glass door, and locked it. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I walked over to my main monitor and collapsed into my ergonomic chair. The lines of code scrolling across the black screen felt like the only things in the universe that made any logical sense right now. Code does not lie. Code does not manipulate you at family gatherings. Code does not take your hard-earned money and laugh in your face while sipping margaritas on a beach. Code executes exactly what it is programmed to do. My business partner, Fiona, knocked gently on the glass. Fiona was the only person who knew how hard I was pushing myself. She had seen me sleep under my desk. She had seen me eat ramen noodles for dinner while wiring thousands of dollars to my parents. I looked at her through the glass and just waved her off. I held up one finger. Give me a minute. I needed total, absolute isolation. I turned back to my screen and entered a complex passcode, opening a hidden, heavily encrypted folder on my desktop. The file was simply and rather dramatically named The Truth. For anyone looking from the outside, it might have seemed like my mother's text was a sudden, shocking betrayal. It was shocking, yes, it was disgusting, but it was not sudden. I am an engineer. I analyze patterns for a living. I build software that detects anomalies, and over the past 3 months, the anomalies in my own family had become too massive to ignore. I had seen the storm clouds gathering on the horizon for weeks. I had felt the subtle, insidious shifts in my parents' behavior. I had noticed the arrogant, unearned smirk on my older brother Harrison's face at family gatherings. They truly, genuinely believed they had outsmarted the quiet, hard-working, socially awkward younger brother. They thought they could take my financial security, the safety net I built for them, and use it to fly off to Miami in first class, rent luxury cars, stay in 5-star resorts, and mock me from 1,000 of away. They thought I was just a naive keyboard jockey who would take the abuse, complain a little, and then go right back to working 80 hours a week to fill the trough back up. They had absolutely no idea that my silence over the past few weeks was not compliance. My silence was meticulous preparation. I was already 10 steps ahead of them. I had spent the last 3 months quietly, obsessively tracking every single digital footprint they left behind. Their whispered phone calls when they thought I wasn't listening, their careless swipes of the debit card, the subtle changes in their financial routing. I had cataloged it all. I had built a perfect, inescapable trap, and my mother's arrogant text message, that sickening ha-ha, was the final definitive piece of evidence I needed to lock the cage. I looked at the folder on my screen. It contained bank statements, IP logs, screenshots of deleted messages, and public records. It was a digital guillotine. Their Miami dream was already on a countdown timer, and they were utterly oblivious. They were celebrating a victory on a ship that I had already torpedoed. I was holding the detonator, and my finger was hovering over the button. I just needed to make sure the blast radius would only consume them, leaving me entirely untouched. I leaned back in my chair, the leather squeaking slightly in the silent room. I closed my eyes, letting the memory of my father's voice wash over me. It was a memory that used to bring me immense comfort, a memory that anchored my sense of duty. but now it tasted like pure, unadulterated poison. "Julian," my father Roland had said, placing a heavy, seemingly affectionate hand on my shoulder years ago. We were standing on the front porch of the house he had bought in the 80s. The paint was peeling, the gutters were sagging, but to him it was a castle. "This house is our legacy, son. It's your inheritance. We all have to pitch in to protect it. Family is the only thing that matters in this world. When the world turns its back on you, your blood is all you have." I believed him. God helped me. I believed in the absolute sanctity of family. I had poured everything into that joint account because I thought I was building a fortress for the people I loved. I thought I was being a good son. I thought I was earning my place in the family hierarchy, proving my worth through sacrifice and dedication. But a fortress built on lies, manipulation, and greed will eventually collapse under its own weight. I just never, in my darkest nightmares, expected that the people I was fiercely protecting from the outside world would be the ones to light the match and burn it down from the inside. I opened my eyes, the residual sadness completely burning away, replaced by a cold, calculating, mechanical focus. I had to go back to the beginning to make sure every single piece of this puzzle was securely in place. I had to review the timeline, not out of nostalgia, but out of a need for absolute precision. I thought the worst was over when I read that text message. I thought the initial shock was the hardest part. I was so incredibly wrong. The real nightmare wasn't the theft. It was discovering the depths of the deception that made the theft possible. Let me take you back to 3 months earlier. The witch of winter was brutally cold. "We need another $1,000 in the joint account by Friday, or they're going to put a lien on the house." "Dad," I replied, rubbing my burning, exhausted eyes, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I just put in $3,000 last week. The mortgage isn't that high. The HOA fees aren't that high. What is going on?" "Are you questioning your own father?" Roland snapped, his voice rising in anger. "Do you know what it costs to maintain real estate these days? The roof needs patching before the snow melts. The water heater is acting up again. If you don't want your inheritance to rot away into nothing, you need to contribute your fair share. Don't be selfish, Julian." My fair share. The words echoed in my head like a physical slap. I was paying for absolutely everything. I was the only one contributing. Yet I was somehow always falling short in his eyes. I was the selfish one for asking a basic accounting question. I felt a knot of pure resentment tighten in my chest, but I pushed it down. I transferred the money. I swallowed the lump of anger in my throat and went back to writing code. I told myself it was for the family. You do not turn your back on your parents when they are in trouble. That is the fundamental rule I was raised on. But that rule was about to be broken permanently. The bitter, infuriating irony of my situation was that while I was eating cheap noodles, wearing 5-year-old shoes, and stressing over every single penny of server costs, my older brother Harrison was living like an absolute king. Harrison was the undeniable golden child. He was older, he was louder, he was traditionally handsome, and he possessed a manipulative, charismatic charm that my parents absolutely worshipped. He could do no wrong. He was supposed to be a high-flying marketing executive at a big firm in the city, constantly bragging about his latest promotion, his massive year-end bonuses, and his stock options. The contrast between our lives was never more sickeningly apparent than at our family Thanksgiving dinner. I arrived exhausted, wearing a plain sweater, having just spent 4 hours fixing a firewall issue. A few minutes later, Harrison pulled into the driveway in a brand new, gleaming, black Porsche Cayenne. He walked into the house wearing a custom-tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking like he just stepped off a magazine cover. His wife, Clara, trailed behind him, dripping in flashy designer jewelry and carrying a handbag that probably cost more than my car. They completely dominated the dinner table conversation. Harrison talked over everyone, boasting loudly about his expensive golf club membership, his stock portfolio, and Clara's private Pilates instructor. My mother, Genevieve, practically hung on his every single word, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. "Oh, Harrison, we are so incredibly proud of you," Genevieve cooped, ignoring the rest of the table and passing him the prime cut of the turkey. "You have built such a beautiful, successful life for your family. You are a true provider." I sat at the end of the table, quiet, invisible, exhausted from a 70-hour work week. No one asked about my startup. No one asked if I was sleeping. No one asked how I was managing the massive financial burden of the house. When a lull in Harrison's boasting finally occurred, I politely mentioned that my company had just landed our first mid-sized client, a crucial milestone for us. Harrison paused, looked at me, and chuckled. It was a cold, condescending sound that made my blood instantly boil. "That's cute, Julian," Harrison said, taking a slow sip of his expensive imported wine. "Let me know when you start making real money. Playing with computers is a fun hobby, but maybe I can introduce you to some people who actually know how to run a real business. You know, people with actual salaries." My mother laughed. My father nodded in silent agreement, chewing his food. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted a sharp tang of metallic blood. I did not say a word. I just stared at my plate. But as I watched Harrison confidently slice his turkey, a dark, unsettling, logical thought crept into my analytical mind. If Harrison was so incredibly wealthy, if he was such a massive success, why had he completely drained his own college fund years ago? Why was he never ever the one paying the emergency repair bills for the house? Why did the financial burden always, without fail, fall on the son who was supposedly just playing with computers? The math simply did not add up, and I hate bad math. The very next week, the fragile illusion of my family's integrity shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It was late at night, around 2 a.m. I was having trouble sleeping, my mind racing with code architecture and unpaid invoices. I decided to log into the joint banking portal just to verify that the property tax check my father had demanded the week prior had actually cleared the account. I scrolled past the usual mundane utility bills, the grocery store runs, the pharmacy charges. Then my eyes locked onto a line item that made my heart physically stop beating for a second. A withdrawal, $5,000. The merchant name read Oasis Travel and Leisure, Miami, Florida. I leaned into my monitor, staring at the screen for a full, agonizing minute. $5,000. The mortgage was not due for another 2 weeks. The property taxes were allegedly already paid. We did not have a family vacation planned. My parents had not traveled out of state since a funeral 5 years ago. They constantly complained about being on a fixed income. I immediately pulled up the detailed transaction history, my hands shaking slightly over the keyboard, my stomach twisted into a tight, sickening knot. The charge was linked directly to the debit card issued to my mother, Genevieve. I did not confront them immediately. Confrontation based on an assumption is a tactical error. I am an engineer. I gather hard data before I execute a command. I need proof. The next morning, as soon as normal business hours began, I called Oasis Travel and Leisure. I put on my best, most polite customer service voice, pretending to be confirming an itinerary for my mother. A cheerful woman named Evelyn answered the phone. "Oh, yes, Mr. Keller," Evelyn said warmly, the sound of typing clicking in the background. "I have Genevieve's booking right here. Is a wonderful package for first-class tickets to Miami, a penthouse suite at the Grand Azure Resort, and a luxury SUV rental waiting at the airport. The deposit was $5,000, and the remaining balance of $8,000 will be charged to the same card next month. Can I help you with the dietary preferences for the flight?" The room started spinning. The air felt thin. "For tickets?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, struggling to maintain my composure. "Yes, sir," Evelyn chirped. "For Genevieve, Roland, Harrison, and Clara. Sounds like a lovely family getaway." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat in silence for a long time. My own family. My parents were actively, maliciously taking my money. The money I literally bled for to keep a roof over their heads. To take my millionaire brother and his snobby wife on a first-class luxury vacation. They were stealing my future to fund his leisure. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, it felt like a physical blow to the chest, leaving me bruised and gasping for air. I needed to talk to someone. The weight of this discovery was crushing me, and I could not carry it alone. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I called my Uncle Silas. Silas was my father's younger brother, the one person in the family who always seemed reasonable, grounded, and sane. He was the uncle who used to take me fishing when I was a kid, when my dad was too busy fawning over Harrison. We met at a quiet, run-down diner on the edge of town. I slid the printed bank statements and the notes from my call with the travel agency across the sticky Formica table. Silas looked at them, his face completely impassive. He didn't gasp. He didn't look shocked. He just took a slow, deliberate sip of his black coffee. "Silas, they are stealing from me," I said, my voice cracking with a mixture of grief and rage. "They are literally embezzling the house fund to pay for a luxury vacation for Harrison. The money I gave them for the roof, for the taxes, it's all going to first-class tickets." Silas said a heavy, patronizing sound that instantly made my skin crawl. He pushed the papers back across the table toward me, face down. "Julian, you need to calm down," Silas said, his voice smooth and dismissive. "It is just money. You're young. You can make more. Your parents are getting older. They haven't been on a trip in years. They deserve a break. And Harrison, well, Harrison has a lot of pressure on him to maintain his image in the corporate world." "Maintain his image with my money?" I demanded, leaning forward, unable to believe what I was hearing. "He drives a Porsche. Silas!" "Family is family, Julian," Silas said smoothly, his eyes shifting away, refusing to meet mine. "You make good money with that computer stuff, or you will eventually. Don't make a big deal out of this. You will tear the family apart over a few thousand. Just swallow your pride, Julian. Be the bigger man. Let them have this one thing." I looked at Silas. I really looked at him. I noticed the expensive brand-new gold watch gleaming on his wrist. A watch he definitely, absolutely could not afford on his meager retirement pension. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me, chilling me to the bone. Silas was not trying to comfort me. He was not trying to keep the peace. He was trying to silence me. He was part of the ecosystem of lies. I nodded slowly, realizing that any argument was utterly pointless. I picked up my papers, stood up from the booth, threw a $5 bill on the table for the coffee, and walked out of the diner into the freezing wind. I thought my parents and my brother were the only monsters in this story. I was wrong. The rot went much, much deeper. The entire family tree was diseased, and I was the only healthy branch they were trying to snap off for firewood. I drove back to my office in complete, deafening silence. The shock and the grief had entirely worn off, replaced by an icy, calculated, unyielding rage. I was absolutely done being the victim. I was done being the gullible family ATM. If they wanted to play games with my life, my money, and my future, I was going to rewrite the rules, and I was going to ensure they lost everything. I sat down at my desk, cracked my knuckles, and opened my laptop. Months ago, I had been quietly, unceremoniously removed from a family group chat on an encrypted messaging app. They claimed it was a glitch and accidental swipe by my mother. I knew it wasn't, but at the time, I hadn't cared enough to force my way back in. Now, I cared deeply. Using a few back-end vulnerabilities I had discovered while testing the security protocols of my own software, I bypassed the app's admin restrictions. It took me less than 20 minutes to quietly mirror the entire chat history directly to my secure local drive. I didn't want to alert them. I just wanted to read what they were saying when they thought I wasn't in the room. The screen populated with hundreds of messages. I scrolled back to the dates the $5,000 Oasis travel agency charge was made. What I read made me physically sick to my stomach. "Harrison, are you sure Julian isn't going to notice the $5,000 missing from the account? He checks that thing like a hawk. Genevieve. Oh, don't worry about Julian, sweetie. He's so buried in his little startup, he barely knows what day it is. Besides, he's used to paying the bills. If he notices, I'll just tell him the water heater exploded. Clara, thank God. I desperately need a tan, and this winter is depressing. And Harrison needs to get away from the stress of the city. We deserve this. Harrison, don't worry, Mom. Once my big deal closes, I'll put the money back. Julian won't know until the money is already spent. It's foolproof. Let the tech nerd fund the lifestyle for a bit. They weren't just taking my money. They were actively, maliciously mocking my dedication. They viewed my hard work, my late nights, my sacrifices, as a weakness to be exploited for their amusement. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single message. I archived the metadata to prove the dates and times. I backed everything up to 3 separate, heavily encrypted secure servers. I was building a federal prosecution file, and they were handing me the evidence on a silver platter while laughing about it. But as I read and reread the chat logs, my analytical mind kept returning to a specific phrase Harrison used. Once my big deal closes, I'll put the money back. Harrison was supposedly a wealthy, highly successful marketing executive. Why did he need my parents to embezzle money to fund his vacation? Why didn't he just pay for it himself? It made no logical sense. The Porsche, the tailored suits, the arrogant demeanor, it was all a facade. But what was underneath it? I dug deeper. I abandoned my startup coding for the night and started running comprehensive background checks using public financial databases, court records, and some highly specialized investigative software my company had access to for fraud analysis. I looked into Harrison's glorious marketing firm. It took me less than 3 hours to completely unravel the lie. I uncovered the massive, ugly truth that the entire family was desperately trying to hide. Harrison had not received a promotion in 3 years. In fact, he was not even working. He had been placed on administrative leave 6 months ago, pending an internal investigation for gross negligence. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found a series of public civil court filings under a slight variation of his name, using his legal first name and my mother's maiden name to hide it from a casual search. Harrison was drowning in a spectacular ocean of debt. Not mortgage debt, not student loans, casino debt. He owed tens of thousands of dollars to a high-stakes, ruthless gambling syndicate in Nevada. The luxury Porsche leased and 3 months behind on payments, facing imminent repossession. The expensive suits maxed out high-interest credit cards. The Miami trip wasn't just a family vacation, it was a celebration of a financial bailout. I cross-referenced the dates of the court filings with the joint account. The same week, my parents started demanding higher property tax and roof repair contributions from me. A massive lump sum payment was wired to a debt collection agency in Las Vegas. My parents hadn't just bought him plane tickets. They had been systematically draining my savings for months to pay off Harrison's massive gambling debts so his snobby wife, Clara, wouldn't file for a messy divorce and drag them all into a humiliating custody battle. They had sacrificed my entire future, my financial stability, to protect Harrison's pathetic, crumbling lie. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark office. The sheer magnitude of the deception was breathtaking. I didn't feel sad anymore. The grief was gone. I felt incredibly powerful. I knew absolutely everything. They knew absolutely nothing. The chessboard was set, and I had already won. The next afternoon, right on schedule, my phone rang. It was Roland. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath to steady my heart rate, and answered, putting on my best, most compliant son voice. "Julin," Roland said, his voice carrying that familiar, heavy, theatrical tone of a burdened patriarch facing an insurmountable crisis. "I was looking at the accounts this morning. The roofer just came by and gave us a final estimate. This is bad, son. Really bad. We need another $2,000 by tomorrow morning, or water is going to start leaking directly into the living room ceiling." It was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. If I hadn't seen the Oasis travel agency receipts, if I hadn't read the disgusting group chat logs, if I hadn't uncovered the Vegas gambling debts, I would have believed every single word. I would have felt the guilt clawing at my chest, and I would have emptied my wallet. 2,000? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral, playing the role of the stressed but beautiful son. That's a lot of money on short notice. Dad, I'm barely making payroll at the startup this week. I know it is, Julian. Roland sighed, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy precision. But family steps up when times are tough. You want this house to be yours one day, don't you? Your inheritance, your legacy, is tied to this real estate. Harrison is completely tapped out with his new business investments, so I have to rely on you. You're my rock, Julian. He lied with such absolute terrifying ease. It was chilling to listen to him breathe life into a total fabrication. All right, Dad, I said smoothly, forcing a tone of reluctant agreement. I'll see what I can move around. Let me check my liquid funds, talk to Fiona about delaying some server payments, and get back to you by tonight. Good boy, Roland said, a very distinct hint of a triumphant smirk audible in his voice. I knew I could count on you. Love you, son. He hung up. I immediately logged into my personal banking portal, but I didn't transfer a single dime to the joint account. Instead, I executed a secure wire transfer, moving every single penny of my personal savings, my emergency fund, and my startup's operational capital into a brand new, highly secure account at a completely different banking institution across the country. I left exactly 42 cents in my old checking account. The Bank of Julian was officially and permanently closed for business. Let them try to squeeze blood from a stone. The next morning, I did not go to my startup. I put on my only good suit and walked into a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise in the financial district. I wasn't there for a tech pitch or an investor meeting. I was there to see Valerie. Valerie was a high-powered corporate attorney who specialized in complex financial disputes, asset recovery, and civil litigation. She was known as a shark in a tailored suit. And right now, I needed the biggest, most ruthless shark in the ocean. I sat across from her massive, polished mahogany desk and placed a thick, heavy manila folder perfectly centered between us. What are we looking at here? Julie Valerie asked, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning my face, sensing the gravity of the situation. Systemic fraud, I said clearly, my voice cold and steady. Financial abuse, embezzlement under false pretenses. Technically, it's a family matter, but I want it treated like a ruthless corporate crime. No mercy. Valerie opened the folder. For the next 20 minutes, there was dead silence in the room, save for the rustling of paper. She meticulously reviewed the bank statements, the Oasis travel agency receipts, the printed screenshots of the encrypted group chat, and the public records of Harrison's Vegas gambling debts that I had compiled. I watched her face. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just methodically flipped the pages, her expression growing colder, sharper, and more intensely focused. Let me summarize, Valerie said, tapping her expensive silver pen on the desk. They used a joint account explicitly intended for real estate maintenance and property taxes to pay off personal casino debts and book luxury travel. Furthermore, they actively, continuously deceived the primary fooner of the account, you, to solicit more funds under entirely false pretenses. And you have time-stamped written proof of their intent to deceive. I do, I confirmed, pointing to the chat logs. Julian, this is airtight, Valerie said, looking up at me, a predatory gleam in her eye. This isn't just a family squabble. This is actionable fraud. We can file a massive civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty. I can petition a judge this afternoon for an emergency freeze on the joint account and any assets linked to it. Do it, I said without a single second of hesitation. Draft the lawsuit. Prepare the injunction for the freeze. But do not file it yet. I want the trap to snap shut when they are fully exposed, when it hurts them the absolute most. Valerie smiled a sharp, incredibly dangerous smile. You are a very patient, very dangerous man. Julian, I'm an engineer, Valerie. I don't build systems to fail. I build them to execute perfectly. While Valerie prepared the legal guillotine, ensuring the paperwork was flawless, I had to ensure the technical trap was equally inescapable. I returned to my startup, shedding the suit and getting back to the code. My partner Fiona and I had been working relentlessly for the past 8 months to secure a massive, game-changing enterprise contract with Apex National Bank. Coincidentally, or perhaps by divine intervention, Apex National was the exact banking institution where my parents held their joint account, their personal checking, and their credit lines. Our proprietary software named Sentinel AI was a masterpiece of code. It was designed to monitor real-time transaction data across millions of accounts and instantly flag, isolate, and freeze accounts showing signs of coordinated fraud, embezzlement, or federal financial crimes. Mr. Alden, the CEO of Apex National, a stern, uncompromising man who valued institutional security above all else, sat in our conference room reviewing the final deployment contract. Julian, if this software works exactly as you claim in the stress tests, it will save this bank millions in liability and federal fines, Mr. Alden said, uncapping his pen and signing the thick document. We are integrating Sentinel directly into our mainframe this weekend. It will have full autonomy to lock down suspicious activity. It works, Mr. Alden, I said, shaking his hand firmly, hiding the immense satisfaction bubbling inside me. It detects patterns that human auditors miss. It flags unauthorized routing, deceptive spending categories, and cross-account laundering with zero hesitation. It is ruthless. I watched with quiet anticipation as the IT team from Apex National began the massive integration process. They were literally installing my company's brain into the bank's nervous system. My parents had absolutely no idea that the money they were stealing from me was sitting in a vault that I was now personally guarding. I wasn't just a victim crying over spilled milk anymore. I was the architect of their impending downfall, and I held the master key to their entire financial existence. The weekend finally arrived, and the highly anticipated Miami trip began. Even though I had moved my own personal money to absolute safety, the joint account still held the massive chunk of cash my parents had hoarded for this trip, plus the credit lines tied to the account. I didn't have to guess what they were doing or wonder if they were enjoying themselves. Clara Harrison's vain, attention-seeking wife was providing a Heidi-of-Hin real-time documentary of their theft on social media. I created a dummy account, completely untraceable, and watched her feed update hour by hour. A photo of 4 first-class boarding passes held up against the airport lounge window. Caption: Wheels up, escaping the winter grind with the best family ever. A sweeping video of a massive beachfront penthouse suite, panning across an ocean view showing Harrison popping a bottle of expensive champagne. Caption: We deserve this. Hard work pays off. A picture of Harrison wearing designer sunglasses, standing proudly next to a rented yellow Lamborghini outside a high-end club. Caption: My king and his new toy, living the dream. Every single post was a dagger meant for my back, but I didn't bleed. I just took screenshots. Clara's arrogance was breathtaking, almost comical in its blindness. She was posting pictures of expensive seafood dinners, complaining about the slow service at 5-star restaurants, boasting about spending thousands of dollars on a whim at designer boutiques. And the most sickening, infuriating part was a post featuring my mother, Genevieve, wearing a new silk dress, holding a glass of champagne on the deck of a chartered yacht. The caption read, "Cheers to the people who make it all possible. No toxic energy allowed on this trip. Good vibes only." Toxic energy. That was their new code word for me. The guy working 80-hour weeks, eating ramen and draining his savings to pay their fake bills was toxic because I might actually demand a shred of respect or accountability. I watched them gorge themselves on my sacrifice. I watched them celebrate their perceived fraudulent victory. Let them drink the champagne. Let them drive the Lamborghini. The bill was coming, and it was going to destroy their lives permanently. It was Tuesday morning. The trap was fully armed, the software was integrated, and the legal paperwork was sitting on a judge's desk. I sat at my desk watching the real-time server logs from the Apex National integration on my secondary monitor. I saw the pings originating from Miami, breakfast at a five-star resort, a massive charge at a high-end designer boutique. Then I noticed a severe anomaly in the logs. An IP address from Wichita, Kansas was attempting to access the joint account portal. I traced the IP immediately. It was Silas, my supportive, peacekeeping uncle Silas. He was logging and using my mother's credentials to initiate a massive wire transfer, likely trying to move more funds from a secondary credit line to cover their extravagant, out-of-control spending in Miami. Silas wasn't just turning a blind eye. He was the inside man, actively facilitating the theft while telling me to be the bigger man. Right at that exact second, my phone buzzed. It was the text from Genevieve, the text that started this whole story. "Julian, we are vacationing in Miami with Harrison and Clara. We emptied the joint account. Haha, you work too much, sweetie. Leave the finances to us. Don't forget to lock up the house if you stop by." That was it. The final, arrogant confirmation. The absolute, undeniable proof of malice. They had taken everything they could reach, and they wanted me to know it. I replied, "Good luck." I didn't wait another second. I opened the Apex National Banking app on my phone. I navigated to the credit cards linked to the joint account, the exact cards they were using right that second in Miami to pay for the penthouse, the yacht, and the Lamborghini. With a cold, steady, unforgiving hand, I clicked Report as Compromised, Stolen. I checked the box for unauthorized fraudulent activity. The system instantly terminated the cards. But I didn't stop there. I sent a single, secure text message to Valerie. "Execute the freeze now." Within 60 seconds, Valerie filed the emergency injunction with the court. At the exact same moment, the Sentinel AI software inside Apex National detected the sudden cancellation of the cards, cross-referenced it with the massive uncharacteristic cash withdrawals made by Silas's IP address, and triggered an automated Level 1 security protocol. The joint account wasn't just frozen. It was completely locked down by federal banking regulations pending a massive fraud investigation. Every card, every line of credit, every asset tied to their names at that bank was instantly vaporized. I leaned back in my chair, picked up my cheap office coffee, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The silence in my office was beautiful. In Miami, the hurricane had just made landfall, and they were standing on the beach without an umbrella. I thought I knew what revenge tasted like, but I was so incredibly wrong. Tasted much, much better than I ever imagined. The silence in my office, which I had cultivated so carefully, was shattered 20 minutes later by the most chaotic, relentless, and desperate sequence of phone calls I have ever experienced. My phone became a hot coal in my hand, vibrating incessantly against the mahogany desk, acting as a rhythmic, jarring reminder of the massive storm I had just unleashed upon their carefully curated, parasitic lives. First, it was my mother, Genevieve. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know it was her. I answered, and her voice hit my ear with a shrill, hysterical, jagged pitch that I didn't even recognize as human. It was a sound stripped of all maternal warmth, replaced by pure, unadulterated, blinding entitlement. "Julian, what have you done?" "You listen to me right now. The clerk just told us our cards are declined. We're at the checkout of the designer boutique, and there's a massive line behind us. People are staring. They're whispering. Julian, fix this right now. Do not embarrass us like this. How dare you play these games with us?" I didn't answer. I just held the phone away from my ear, watching the incoming call counter tick up. A digital tally of their mounting, terrifying desperation. As the line went to voicemail, then immediately rang again. My father was next, Roland. He was screaming, not at me, but at the air, his voice echoing with the unmistakable primal panic of a man who had suddenly violently realized He was completely, utterly powerless for the first time in his entire life. "Julian, pick up the phone. We're stuck at the resort front desk. They're telling us our reservation is flagged for payment failure. The manager is talking about calling local security. Pick up. Damn you. Use your business credit line. Fix this now, or so help me. You will regret this for the rest of your life." I felt a cold, sharp, and deeply earned thrill of satisfaction. But I didn't gloat out loud. I didn't say a word. I stayed professional. I stayed silent. I was a man of business. And right now, business was dealing with the catastrophic, overdue fallout of their choices. I turned my phone off, placed it face down on my desk, and took a long, slow, steadying breath. I knew exactly what was happening in Miami. The Sentinel AI had not just flagged the account, it had initiated a Level 1 security lockdown. That meant the bank had effectively frozen every single liquid asset, credit line, and debit access point associated with the joint account. They weren't just embarrassed. They were trapped in a foreign city with no way to pay for a room, a meal, or a plane ticket home. They were experiencing for the first time the total vulnerability I had lived with for months. They were getting a taste of the panic they had so casually inflicted upon me. The real trap, however, was waiting for them back in Wichita. They were going to have to fly back to Kansas, likely having to beg or borrow from some poor soul who didn't know the truth yet to face the music. And when they did, they were going to find that the comfortable parasitic life they had built on my back had evaporated into thin air. 2 days later, I was sitting in the back of a small wood-paneled courtroom. The atmosphere was stifling, smelling of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the dry, suffocating scent of old, dusty legal documents. The air conditioning was buzzing with a mechanical hum that grated on my nerves. My lawyer, Valerie, sat beside me, her briefcase open, her demeanor as cool and sharp as a surgeon's blade. She had spent the last 48 hours preparing every single piece of evidence, turning my months of quiet, meticulous data collection into a legal trap that was impossible to escape. She didn't look at the opposition. She only looked at the truth, and she was ready to dismantle them piece by piece. Across the aisle, they arrived. Roland, Genevieve, and Harrison. They looked drastically different than they had in the vibrant, arrogant, filtered Miami photos I had seen on social media. The golden tan was still there, but the arrogance had been completely replaced by a frantic, jagged fear. They looked like people who had just realized the ship they were sailing on was sinking, and they were out of lifeboats. Harrison, the man who boasted about his luxury Porsche and his massive deals, looked completely disheveled. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, and the terrifying realization of his ruin. He kept nervously checking his phone, which I knew was utterly useless, as his service had likely been terminated for non-payment along with the rest of his digital life. When they spotted me, the transition in their expressions was fascinating to watch. Roland went from frantic to murderous. He started to stand up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, pointing a shaking finger at me. You little rat! You did this! You sabotaged us! You ruined our reputation! You ruined our vacation!" Valerie didn't even look up from her notes. She just spoke in a low, clear, icy tone. "Mr. Keller, if you speak one more word in this courtroom without being addressed by the judge, I will have you removed for contempt, and I will make sure the BA knows exactly why you are being sued for fraud. Your vacation ended the moment you decided to steal money that wasn't yours." Roland sat down, his mouth snapping shut like a metal trap. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Fear. Not the fear of a parent worried for their child, but the pure, unadulterated fear of a man who realized he had miscalculated his opponent's power. He was terrified of me. He was terrified of what I had become. Harrison leaned over, his voice a harsh, desperate whisper. "Julian, look, this is just a misunderstanding. We just needed a loan. Mom and Dad panicked. Let's just talk about this like family. We can settle this outside. We don't need lawyers involved. I can pay you back. I just need a little time. Please, don't do this." I looked at Harrison. I looked at the man who had mocked my hobby while stealing my future. The man who had gambled away his children's security to feed his own pathetic vanity. I leaned forward, my voice barely above a whisper, cold as liquid nitrogen. "Harrison, you aren't family. You're a liability. And the time for talking ended when you started stealing. You don't have time. You don't have money. You don't have anything left but the lies you've told. You are going to listen to the truth today, whether you want to or not." The room was heavy with the weight of my words. I saw my mother's eyes widen. She finally realized that the son she had dismissed as toxic was the only thing standing between them and total financial annihilation. The air felt thin, and for the first time, the roles were reversed. I was the one in control, and they were the ones begging for a lifeline that I had no intention of throwing. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The judge, a non-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, took her seat, and the room went dead silent. She looked down at the mountain of documents Valerie had filed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She adjusted her glasses and stared at the files like she was dissecting a cadaver. "This is a civil suit involving alleged fiduciary breach and coordinated financial fraud," she stated, her voice echoing in the chamber. "The plaintiff, Julian Keller, alleges that funds designated for family real estate maintenance were systematically diverted for personal debt and luxury travel. Defendants." Roland stood up, his voice shaking with righteous, manufactured indignation. He tried to project the image of a dignified patriarch, but he only looked desperate. "Your Honor, this is a family matter. Julian is our son. He agreed to contribute to the family home. He's just upset because we decided to take a trip and he wasn't invited. This is harassment. He's trying to punish us for living our lives. This is a personal dispute, not a crime. He's trying to drag his family through the mud because he's bitter about his own startup success." Valerie didn't waste a second. She stood up, smooth and terrifyingly precise. "Your Honor, this isn't about an invitation to a trip. This is about a documented 3-month pattern of systematic, calculated theft." She began to move, projecting the evidence onto the courtroom's large screen. It was a digital assault. First, the bank statements. She highlighted the dates, the locations, the massive luxury charges in Miami, the hotel, the car, the shopping, and then compared them to the dates of my wire transfers labeled mortgage maintenance. It was undeniable. The money had flowed directly from my account to their vacation, bypassing the mortgage completely. It was a clear, unambiguous path of theft. Then she pulled the trump card, the encrypted chat logs. "Your Honor," Valerie said, her voice dripping with professional disdain. "The defendants claimed this was a misunderstanding. Please read the messages sent between the parties." The courtroom was silent as everyone read the projected texts. Harrison's mocking comments about my startup, my mother's casual, cruel dismissal of my hard-earned savings as something I wouldn't miss. The evidence was damning. But that wasn't the twist. That was just the foundation. The real revelation was still coming, and I could see the sweat beading on Harrison's forehead, glistening under the bright fluorescent courtroom lights. "And now," Valerie said, her voice dropping, "for the matter of intent, we need to look at where the rest of the funds went." She pulled up the public financial records I had uncovered. She showed the court the massive recurring wire transfers from my parents' joint account to the Vegas gambling syndicate. The defendants weren't just taking money for a trip. They were bailing out the eldest son's illegal gambling debts, effectively using the plaintiff's income to fund a criminal enterprise. The courtroom gasped. The gallery was buzzing with whispers. Harrison's face turned white, then a sickly shade of gray. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, starting to sob. But it was the performative, frantic sobbing of someone who realized the jig was finally up, and there was no way out. "But, Your Honor," Harrison blurted out, losing his composure, "that's not relevant. Julian agreed to the account. It was family money. Julian agreed to an account for mortgage maintenance, Valerie corrected him sharply, silencing him instantly. Not for the Oasis travel agency or Las Vegas debt collection. And here is the piece to resistance, the element that makes this a federal issue. She motioned to the back of the courtroom, and Mr. Alden, the CEO of Apex National Bank, stepped forward as the witness who turned the entire case from a family dispute into a federal nightmare. He explained that Sentinel AI, the fraud detection system Julian's own company had built, had flagged the Keller transactions as high-risk laundering patterns within milliseconds. Not because Julian was angry, but because the account showed clear signs of wire fraud, deceptive withdrawals, and suspicious transfers tied to gambling debt and luxury spending. The bank was already preparing records for the Department of Justice. In that moment, Genevieve broke down. Roland looked like he could barely breathe, and Harrison finally understood that his lies, debts, fake success, and stolen money had all collapsed in public. The judge ordered them to repay every cent with interest, and the family home, the so-called legacy they had used to guilt Julian for years, was ordered to be sold to satisfy the judgment. Outside the courtroom, local reporters were waiting, and the story of a tech entrepreneur exposing his own family's financial fraud spread through Wichita almost immediately. Harrison's image as the successful golden child was destroyed,